Well, in the last 26 hours, there's been a lot of talk about Brexit. And so this isn't the first conversation there's been about Brexit, but this will be a conversation. And one of the reasons I'm standing here is to encourage you to feel that you can be part of this conversation using your hands and grabbing my attention, because remains incredibly complicated and incredibly uncertain. We're going to get clarity from the platform, but I want you to see me as a bridge between you and their wisdom, understanding a situation which is moving, rather like what's happening with the United States at the moment, incredibly quickly in directions which no one is really sure of. It is entitled The World After Brexit. I would suggest we haven't even got to the beginning of Brexit, so actually the title is not quite right. We should probably be talking about the world as it embraces the implications of Brexit, risks and opportunities. We're going to talk about the direction of Europe and the rest of the world, how the reaction will emerge from that. There's no prescription about what we're going to talk about. Not just the reasons of Brexit, but also the outlook for Europe and the rest of the world. But predictions in this are very complex, as we've seen. I come from Britain. In the last few days alone, things have changed quite considerably in terms of the definition of what Brexit is likely to mean. But if you're looking at your summary on the programme, I'd like to point you to the third and fourth bullet points. Will more nations drop out of the EU? Is the basis of the EU being threatened? Because that has to be considered as well. There are those who see what's happening with Britain as the first stage of a rapid potential disintegration. Others disagree. So we're joined here on the platform by Donald Johnston, former Secretary General of the OECD. Welcome, nice to see you again, Donald. And 3 former Prime Ministers. So this is going to be a conversation. The first thing is, what is Brexit and where are we at the moment? Let me just get a quick definition from each of the 4 panelists. Carl Bildt, where are we on Brexit? What's your understanding of where we are?
We are nowhere. The Brits have had a referendum, you might be aware of that. They are in near panic on how to handle it. They will be forced to go into an exit negotiation. That's going to take 2 years. Add to that some years in order to define a new relationship. So in 5 years' time, we might know where we are, or where they are, to be precise.
5 years' time. The phrase which keeps being used is hard Brexit, soft Brexit. Each of you, is there a hard Brexit coming for Britain, or a softer than hard Brexit?
The Brits will have to decide. I mean, the European Union is there. They have decided to leave. We are waiting for them to say what they want, what kind of new relationship they want with the 27 other remaining members of the European Union. It's not up to us, it's up to them. From what I see when I follow the UK debate, it is likely to be a highly divisive issue in UK and inside the Conservative Party. I think they're heading for some problems.
Esko Aho, do you have clarity?
I read a couple of years ago Daniel Kahneman's book, Thinking Fast and Slow. And I think this decision was, this referendum result, vote for Brexit, was based on fast thinking. But Brexit cannot be based on fast thinking. It must be based on slow thinking. And I think we are, just like Carl Bildt said, we are nowhere, because there is no understanding what Brexit really means. For me, it means maybe formal, the UK's formal exit from the EU decision-making system. But that interdependence between the UK and the European Union will stay. It's economic interdependence, political interdependence. It will not disappear.
Donald Johnston, do you have clarity of what Brexit means?
Well, I've been watching it from Canada. No, because of my strong attachment to Europe and to the wonderful European experiment, of which it's almost miraculous where we've come to, and that's why I worry about the unraveling effect of this. But if it happens, and I say if it happens because I'm not convinced that it will happen. Carl has said we're talking maybe 5 years of negotiation. Can Britain and all the uncertainty that creates really accept that kind of uncertainty, which is affecting investment at the moment? It's affecting every aspect of British life. And you know, I also, when I hear that the Brits really wanted this, I take issue with that. I mean, basically, the vote was razor thin. Effectively, the difference is 1.2 some odd million votes. 72% of the eligible voters voted. So how do we know what the population is going to think as they start to understand what the full consequences of Brexit, hard Brexit, might be? As Baron Ashton said, right here in Seoul, the day before yesterday, she said, well, there are 3 reasons for this. First of all, our borders. We want basically to control our borders. The rate of unemployment at the moment in the UK is 4.9%. I mean, how many of us would like to have that? That's one issue. The second issue, she said, independence. Well, from Brussels regulation and so on.
Get back control.
Well, finally, and money that's going to flow back we can use for domestic purposes. I suppose the sort of thing that Farage and Johnston were touting about the National Health Service and so on. So I think now that people are going to start to understand what they voted for or against, we'll have a totally different view of what Brexit may mean, if it means anything at all.
All right, well, let me be clear about this. Can I ask all 4 of you, do you believe Brexit will take place?
No, I don't. I think Article 50 may be triggered, but any time up until it actually happens, you can have a reversal, apparently. And after all, most parliamentarians, even now, are not in favor of Brexit. And then the Prime Minister herself is a remainder.
If I have to guess today, my feeling is that it's never going to happen.
It's never going to happen.
It's never going to happen. It's so complicated process, and so many things will happen within the next 5 years, which can change the path. So my guess is that it's mission impossible.
Carl Bildt?
It's very nice for once to disagree with Esko, which I...
Baltic solidarity.
Well, quite. No, Nordic non-solidarity in this particular case. No, it will happen. And it will happen for the simple reason that there has been a referendum. The UK is a democracy. There is no political party in the UK that's going to go back on that particular decision. The Conservative Party is locking itself into becoming a Brexit party. The Labour Party is in a downward spiral of decay and disruption. There's no Liberal Democrats might be in favour of revisiting the decision, but they are nowhere. I don't see any political scenario in which they will not leave the table of Europeans taking decisions within the next 2-3 years, and then the real mess starts of defining their relationship.
Yeah, it was not that easy to join the European Union. We worked together with Carl in that time, and actually, in my case, I had to fight against the majority of my own party to get Finland to join the European Union. But I'd like to put that discussion about Brexit into the context. And I think what Papandreou said, that is very relevant. So we have to understand that we are living in the Western world in 2 different realities now. Because of globalization, because of a very rapid technological change. And these 2 realities are, for the first, for those who have capacities, skills and talents needed, who are not afraid of globalization, not afraid of future technological changes, and who are benefiting from this change going on. And then those who are on the other side, who are having little education, or if any, who have no skills and capacities, who are afraid of losing jobs, and who are not benefiting from that at all. And this is not going through party lines, this is dividing parties, not only in Europe, but as we have seen in the United States as well. And that's why I think we have to, when we are trying to find a solution to this, we cannot look at only the European Union institutions and constitutions,
but your analysis of how fragile the Union is at the moment, potentially?
I think it is divided as well. It is fragmented, for sure.
But is it fragmenting even further with an ever greater fragility, which may... I mean, Donald Tusk, the President of the Council, has said very clearly, this is now a moment of destiny for the European Union.
I think the European Union has tried to be more and more all the time, and the traditional and the core of the Union has not been taken care of as well as it should. And for me, it is the single market.
But is it more fragile now as a result of Brexit or not?
Single market is not fragmented, and single market can be expanded.
A political union.
Expanded, even in these circumstances. We can do more to create well-functioning single market. By the way, if you look at the UK from that perspective, UK is not the bad boy in the European Union. If you look at the countries who have not executed EU common laws and legislations well, Luxembourg is the worst case. Then Poland, Slovenia, Romania, and after that, Belgium, France, Germany, and Italy. Actually, the United Kingdom is performing better than any out of these 6 original member countries.
And many, in fact, privately, I think, do say that Britain says a lot of things which they wouldn't mind saying as well. Carl Bildt, how fragile is the European Union now?
I wouldn't use the word fragile, I would say
vulnerable,
challenged. Less internally, as a matter of fact. I mean, one of the striking things after the Brexit vote in the UK is that support for the European Union has surged by 10-15% in opinion polls in virtually every country. Because suddenly people, when they say you can complain about Brussels, or you complain about things, but when you actually try to do something and leave, it becomes very messy. So a surge in support for the European Union at the moment, no question about that. Then it's challenged by reality. I mean, did any one of us anticipate a revisionist Russia starting to change borders in Europe? Did we envisage the meltdown of Syria with massive refugee flows that are challenging the politics of our countries? Had we foreseen all of the consequences of the technological revolution? No, we hadn't. So we are challenged by new realities. And what is happening then, and that's striking, I think, is that whenever none of us are prime ministers at the moment, but we've been prime ministers, when you look at the in-tray of a European prime minister at the moment, of refugees, of a resurgent Russia, of technological change, all of them understand, I can't do this on my own. Even the biggest of the European countries is too small. I have to go to Brussels or wherever and meet my other colleagues and try to find common solutions. Those are challenging, those are difficult, but everyone understands there's no alternative. We're simply too small individually in a world that is more complicated, more challenging, to a certain extent even more dangerous than it used to be during our times.
Quickly, before I go to Donald, though, I mean, we've got Golden Dawn in Greece, you've got your radical parties in Finland, you've got your radical parties in Sweden. There is a different politics emerging. Look what's happened in Poland, look what's happened in Hungary.
There is a different politics. I mean, we have a fragmentation of the political landscapes of Europe, which is quite challenging. I mean, the politics of Europe used to be dominated by the big political parties. There were normally some Christian Democrats thing, and there was normally a Social Democrat thing. It's different versions in different countries. That's no longer the case. Primarily the center-left has imploded all over the place, happens to be the center-right to a certain extent as well, and we have a number of different parties. They might be Green or Pirates or Anti or whatever, and that has made the politics of the different European countries more difficult to handle, no question about that. We might be good at the art of coalition politics in our countries, but a lot of other countries haven't a clue.
They use the word challenging. They're former prime ministers now. What they mean actually is behind closed doors, it's pretty scary. That's what many are saying at the moment. Donald, what's your view?
Well, thank you, Dick. I look at this as someone who's fought 2 referenda in a federation. That's Quebec and Canada. And, you know, I think George made the point, and Carl just made a very good point. I think that this exercise, however it ends up, is actually going to give strength to European unity. People are starting to think as Europeans, according to reports, rather than nationally. I think that's your point, Carl. They're saying this has value. And George made a point. I mean, I think it's pretty clear that the Union has perhaps gone too broad and not deep enough at the outset. And now there has to be consolidation, and it has to move more towards something which people hate to talk about, but a federal kind of structure within Europe, which, by the way, I went back and looked at remember the European Coal and Steel Commission, when it was created back in 1951, I think it was, the French government said this is the first step in a federation of Europe. In other words, the notion that there has to be a lot of reform to make it an operative federation while still maintaining the characteristics of each country in terms of culture and in terms of identity and in terms of language. We've done that successfully in Canada. I'm convinced that Europe's going to move in that direction. I don't think it's going to weaken it. I think it's going to strengthen it. With or without Brexit, we'll see what happens at that score. But I mean, I really have found that a lot of my people say, well, you know, we hear the French criticizing Brussels. Well, you hear a lot of people in the States criticizing Washington. Ask Donald Trump. I mean, that's the way those nations work. We do criticize Ottawa from every province. That's the nature of it. But we have much better equalization. You talked about who's going to help Greece. Well, in Canada, as George knows, because he spent much of his life there, we have a very sophisticated equalization system so that when Newfoundland is in the dumps and its credit ratings are bad, the rest of us have to transfer funds. This takes time. It takes evolution. I think that's going to happen. Personally, I think that's going to happen to Europe.
The World Knowledge Forum